So we'll go on to our next speaker. It's David Ernst. He's the wastewater superintendent with the town of Windsor. Go ahead, David.
Good morning. Thank you all. So real quick, couple things about the town of Windsor. This is our staff schedule, and that came into play as far as response in good and bad ways. If you notice down in the operations bullet, operators work 4/10s, and Wednesday is an overlap day, so everybody works on Wednesday. As Steve mentioned, we use that to kind of create work groups. At first, we split the operators up into 2-person groups. That became cumbersome very quickly, and we went back to 3-person groups. And one team or one crew had every other Wednesday off, and that worked very well for quite a while. When this COVID first came out, or when the first shelter in place was issued in mid-March, it was stressful for everybody, and nobody knew just how this was going to spread, whether we were going to be 10, 20, or 100 or 1,000 per day. Of course, as a person, I don't want anybody to get sick, and as a manager, if I did have to lose 1 or 2 operators, either through sickness or through self-quarantine, by splitting the shifts up that way, I knew I still had staff to continue daily operations. At a wastewater treatment plant, there was no time off. The shelter, as soon as the town issued the shelter in place, March 16th, I think the county followed immediately after that, or maybe the same day. We couldn't stay home. We run a treatment plant. We can obviously limit what we do at the treatment plant, but somebody still has to be here every day. Next slide, please. I want to talk just a little bit about the Kincaid fire in October of last year. There's quite a few similarities, even though these are 2 completely different disasters, for lack of a better term. At the end of October of 2019, the town of Windsor was evacuated. You can apply this towards the next earthquake, the next fire, the next flood. Employee access was a real issue for us. Through mutual aid, there might be a sheriff from Alameda County at the corner of the road to get to the plant. He doesn't know me or any of my operators from the next person. So think about that if there is an earthquake and roads are blocked, either through destruction or by police. Employee access is something we had to find out the hard way was an issue. PPE, those N95 masks we ordered for the fire came in very handy a couple months later. Another issue or question that came up is when does essential services stop? The fire was relatively close to the plant. We could see obviously smoke and orange flames throughout the first 2 nights. A question, thankfully, I didn't have to answer at that time, but it's certainly one you have to think about. Working without your administration and utilizing the Emergency Operations Center, that was a bit of a crash course for me in October, and those immediately applied to the COVID-19. The evacuation for the town was less than 7 days, I think. Obviously, through COVID, we're into 100+ days. Even though the administration is working from home, it's not as efficient, as we all want it to be, right? Bills still need to get paid, supplies still need to get ordered. And utilizing the Emergency Operations Center for not only PPE supplies, but fuel was extremely helpful. Next slide, please. So back to COVID in March 2020, stay-at-home order enforced by the town of Windsor on the 16th. At the exact same time, a guideline came out for essential employees. I talked a little bit about how we used our schedules or our staffing to make things work. Break room, locker room, vehicle usage, shared workspaces. As Steve mentioned earlier, those all came into play. We did something similarly and some things a little bit differently. We're small. There's only 6 operators plus myself, so it wasn't too difficult to maintain social distance in some of these. Working remotely, the town was very flexible. Where we could work remotely, we did, but as wastewater treatment plant operators, that's just not possible. General meetings, daily shift change, process control meetings, etc. A real simple solution is we went outside. Some of those meetings used to be held after lunch. Well, when it's 100 degrees outside, all we have to do is switch those meetings to the morning, and it's a nice day outside at the picnic table. PPE, we've talked about, an issue for everybody, I'm sure. Again, the EOC is a great resource for some of that stuff. Employees' personal responsibilities. I said at the beginning, this was stressful for everybody. I don't want to call it the conspiracy people, as Steve did, but you need to know your staff. I mean, are they caring for an elder or somebody with health issues at home? Is their spouse, husband or wife, another essential worker, whether it's police or healthcare? Everybody had different stresses, but I can guarantee you everybody did have stress. And that's just talking, that's just communication, figuring out and being flexible. How can we make this work? How can we get our job done and you feel safe? Next slide, please. Communication. Communication, just real briefly, obviously is important everywhere all the time and still gets complaints, right? Everybody wants more communication. The mid-management, frontline supervisors are the key to that. The communication that comes down from executive management, you need to make sure it gets all the way to the rank and file employees. And those questions and concerns from the rank and file employees need to get back up to executive management. Because nobody's been through this before, right? This isn't a fire or a flood or an earthquake. This is something we can't see, but we know is out there, and it's stressful. It's stressful. Next slide, please. Heather and Steve both talked about this. Alternate vendors, absolutely. Cross-training became very important very quickly. My environmental compliance staff was shelter in place and they were not here. The environmental program manager came in for compliance samples 1 or 2 days a week as necessary, but the operators got up to speed and trained real quick on process samples. So if your operators don't know how to run some processes in the lab, don't wait. Now's the time to do it. Mutual aid agreements. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Water Agency Response Network, I highly recommend that you become familiar with it. When this first came out, the worst thing that could happen to a plant is all of my operators are sick and there's nobody here to run it. So I immediately reached out to other chief plant operators that I know, and we had, frank discussions. How are you staffing, and who do you have available in case one or both of us needs operators? How can we make sure that wastewater still gets treated? Parts and equipment, I touched on about vendor payment. Like I said, we still need supplies, and those vendors still need to get paid. A CAL card or a credit card works for a while, but if those CAL card payments still need to get made, or after a couple of months, nobody's going to accept those numbers anymore. Next slide, please. Just some quick links. Like I said, through both of these disasters, the Sonoma County EOC was extremely helpful and very responsive. I got PPE from them in April that I didn't think existed anywhere in the county. And, you know, with one request and within 2 days, I had 95% alcohol for disinfectant. You know, it wasn't, you weren't going to find Lysol, you weren't going to find wipes anywhere in town, but, you know, 95% alcohol does the same thing. The Water Agency Response Network is a great resource, a great tool. And for those of you who don't fully understand how the EOC works, I would say go to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and that's a great resource on how this system works when it comes to supplies and finance and other resources.
There's a few questions came in for you.
Sure.
Julia Hassey just said you can connect with state OES. They work through Cal Warren to provide face coverings, masks, hand sanitizer, and disinfectants. And then we got a question from Catherine Curtis. Are you requiring your staff to take FEMA training?
Management staff, management staff is required, but it doesn't hurt for, I'll say, rank and file staff, for lack of a better term, to understand the process. I would encourage everybody to be on the same page when it comes to this. None of it's a secret, and all of it's extremely useful.
Okay, and then there's just a last comment from Julia Hassney that all FEMA and SIMS training is online for basic ICS. And then she says the state put out the DC 606 class, which is good.
Yes.
So thanks, David. We'll go to our next speaker. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a polling question.
Right. We have another polling question here. It may be quite obvious, but we're going to ask anyway, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And it's, does your agency have an emergency plan in place for? I guess you can list all that you have a plan in place for. And so, I see a bunch of yeses, some don't knows. Yes, so we'll give a few more seconds here for responses. We'll be closing the poll in 5 seconds here. 3, 2, and 1. All right. It looks like most of yes, we have a few don't knows, but no knows. Good for that. I'd rather it be a don't know than a straight out no. So thanks for your responses.